All right. This is Amuna Israel, Soulonomics 101 Lev Project, a very late edition of the Lev Project this evening. I know I told you guys back on Thursday that if I didn't make it back yesterday, which was hectic, and I definitely didn't, and I was resting all yesterday night and today, I said I would come back um, tonight. So here I am, trying to keep my word here for coming back. And as we continue on this Ferry Hill Plantation, John Blackford, if you're new to this, this is what, the third installment? Is this the third installment? I think it's the third installment. Hold on one second. I think it is. Hold on one second. I think this is number 3 of this conversation, and it's getting very interesting. And as we're going through it, more and more thoughts are actually coming into my mind, and all of the other research. That's the thing with research, and I am kind of stalling a little bit just to make sure I put the right one. That is the third installment. The thing with research is you don't get, yes, the third one. You don't get it all at the same time. You pick up little pieces, and that's kind of the thing that I find for some of us who are new to this information or new to knowledge or in different areas, because there's so many things. Some things happen every day in so many different places. You just have to kind of pick a spot. But what I find is that sometimes we get impatient, we get a little view, and we're like, yes, this is it. But it takes years, and some people dedicate their lives to just learning all that they can learn in a certain space, because there's always something that pops up that you didn't know. And so the pieces, when they begin to come together, it's a real beautiful thing. And yeah, so definitely welcome everybody. Thanks for just joining us. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to share them. I'm going to go ahead and start. You see it's late on, well, it's late on this side of the waters. And so I'm going to read, or I am going to read now part 3, we're still in the introduction, believe it or not. I mean, this introduction, I guess they're trying to fill in all the blanks, because again, the journal, as we saw, was a private one, and it probably wasn't intended for us to be reading now, but too bad, so sad we are. So part 5 of social and cultural life. I did press it so you can see it. It says the members of the Black, and by the way, so just to catch us up, the Blackford family was ridiculously rich. They owned a lot of land. He had his hand in everything. He was an entrepreneur. He was in the ferry. He had farms. He was doing a little bit of everything, okay? It says the member of the Blackford family seemed never to have had a dull moment. Situated in a thick, let me make this bigger so I won't be jacking up words as I'm reading here. I like books. I like the physical book, because when I'm reading off the internet, it could play tricks with your mind. It says situated in a thickly populated area and within easy driving distance of Haggerston, Boonesboro, and Sharpsburg, Maryland, and Shepherdstown and Harper's Ferry, Virginia, Ferry Hill Place was hardly ever without one or more visitors, some of whom spent days and weeks at a time. Furthermore, the ferry led many travelers and strangers to stop at the Plantation House. Many of Blackford's close friends and relatives called every day to inquire about Mrs. Blackford's health, and dined or supped with them, and traveled often, ate at the plantation. A check for 1 month shows that daily callers ranged from 2 to 10. Those who dined ranged from 2 to 5. Those who spent the night ranged from 2 to 4. And the individual guests remained 3, 5, 9, and 24 days. Some came like Miss Berry of Sharpsburg to bring delicacies, quote, cake and jelly for Mrs. B, end quote, and remained for only a few minutes. Some were businessmen, some laborers seeking employment. And among them were Scotsmen seeking subscription to magazine, and Irish and German peddlers with their packs on their backs. The Blackford family, white and black, very interesting how they say family, white and black, suffered many ills. Mrs. Blackford had been ill for some time before January 4th, 1838, when the journal opens. Dr. Richard Parent paid professional calls nearly every day for several months, sometimes twice per day, but he was also a close friend, and he, his wife, and the widow of Dr. Charles McGill paid many social calls and often dined at the Ferry Hill place. Dr. Arthur J. Smith, Blackford's son-in-law, paid professional calls and did Miss Israel Fry, a midwife who attended the Blackford slave women. But she also paid social calls. Blackford himself administered drugs and patent medicines to members of both his black and white families. These medicines included silk powder, Brandirth pills, castor oil, chamomile, Epsom salt, spirits of niter, salt, pepper, magnesia, and landolin. I think it's very interesting to say, and I said this before in a video a long time ago, that it is very important to acknowledge, as we're seeing the language here, that there was a relationship, however tumultuous, however adversarial, however damaging. Nonetheless, there was a relationship between, quote, black people and, quote, white people. And I know it kind of bothers me every time, me personally, that both his black and white family, but in some places they classified, and this is why you would actually get the slave master's name. And that would mean that you are a part of that family and you are the servant class within that family. So that dictates a relationship. And this is why I like to keep talking about my domestic violence scenario, because you see a close relationship and an abuse of that relationship or power within a domestic violence scenario. So it is within the slave master scenario. And so it's not me at this point keep calling them family. It's actually the narrator who's doing it. So it says, another person who was often at Ferry Hill Place was Mrs. Naif, a seamstress. She seems to have made most of the clothing for the slaves and much of that for the Blackford family. Blackford and his sons patronized tailors in nearby towns who measured and cut their garments, but Mrs. Naif would sew the garments which the tailor had cut. This was true also of the clothing of his wife and daughter. But Mrs. Naif was more than a hired worker. She was a friend, and she and her daughter were often guests in the home. Like, so apparently this plantation, according to what they're saying, was the place to be. Everybody came through eating food. So you always had to prepare, or not them, the quote servant class or the enslaved individuals would definitely, especially if they worked in the kitchen, would always have to prepare for all of these people who just happened to be popping by. And I could almost figure they popping by because they know they're going to get food and service. It's like a hotel of some sort. Blackford was well educated and widely read man. His family too was educated and well read. Blackford was an avid reader of the Baltimore Patriot and always noted in his journal the failure of its arrival. He also subscribed to the Haggerston Torchlight, the New York Whig, a Virginia paper, probably the Richmond Whig, and the unidentified Philadelphia paper. He subscribed to the American Farmer of Baltimore and the Ladies' Companion of New York. His library consisted of, quote, large collection of books, end quote, including encyclopedias, dictionary, a set of state papers, history, classics, and biographies. Among the latter were John Marshall's Life of Washington and Pulchuk's Lives. Blackford's son Franklin and other young men of the vicinity made use of both the newspaper and books at Ferry Hill Place. Blackford sent one of his sons, Henry, to the well-known Murcheboro, Pennsylvania Academy, and the youngest one, William, to Francis Drury School in Boonesboro. It was to please Henry that Blackford subscribed to the Philadelphia newspaper. The Blackford family was deeply religious, and except for Blackford himself, was adherent churchgoers. So everybody except for him, whatever that means, for whatever it's worth. It says here, Blackford was a member of the Episcopal Church, Mrs. Blackford of the Presbyterian, and the children were divided in their affiliation. So everybody in his family was going somewhere else. It says Jeanette married a Roman Catholic. The other children attended various churches, including Episcopal, Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, German, Reformed, and Dunkard. They attended also interdenominational revival service in Sharpsburg and a camp meeting in Pleasant Valley. The Blackfords entertained several different ministers, 2 Episcopalian, 2 Presbyterian, and 1 Methodist, 1 Dunkard, and 1 German Reformed at Ferry Hill during the year. All of them dined at least once, and 2 of them spent the night. Like, you just show up at somebody's crib like, yeah, we here to spend the night. I guess this was, again, when you knew your neighbors. The family contributed regularly to the support of the Episcopal, Presbyterian, and German Reformed churches and made large contributions to the building both Episcopal and German Reformed edifices. They also made small contributions to the Methodist church program. Oh, hold on. We almost got to the journal. We're not even at the journal yet. Hold on, let me make sure. Let me check on 1 second. If you have any questions or comments as we go along, sorry. For some reason when you share your screen and you open up something, it takes you into this crazy looking world. So I had to release my screen for 1 second while I make sure that I don't have any comments. Give me a moment while I pull this up. I want to thank everybody who has just joined us. We are currently looking or listening to the introduction of Ferry Hill Plantation. John Blackford, apparently a socialite, an entrepreneur, a slave master. And so many people will be like, this is the life. Like they said, they didn't have a dull moment. And so again, my theory of, especially in a situation like this, where he was a big plantation owner, everyone wasn't necessarily caught up in everything that happened in their quote unquote slaves' lives. And so again, they're kind of disconnected, if you ask me. But I'm gonna continue. Hold on, let me go. I don't see any remarks, so I'm gonna go back over and share back my screen. Now, again, each plantation had its own culture, so we can't say this across the board. And if we don't learn anything, please put that back. If we learn anything from these conversations, we realize that we can't generalize realistically, because across the board, again, it's different. And hopefully that sheds some light. But let's it was an enslaved system, but again, everybody wasn't a slave. As we read in this town, you had a number of, well, at least 1/3 of the population as it relates to black and white was free. 1,500, if I remember correctly. So it says the Blackfords enjoyed the social life typical of the rural farmer and planter class. Men and boys enjoyed fishing and hunting, and the women quilting parties. Blackford himself took great delight in shooting foxes, of course, because, just going around shooting foxes, because of their destruction of birds and poultry. Franklin shot quail and pigeons in Virginia, which abound in great numbers, quote, flying in all directions, end quote. The young people of the both sexes enjoy boat riding on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal during the summer and skating and sleighing right in the winter. The organized, quote, oyster parties, end quote, at Shepherdstown and, quote, fishing parties, end quote, at Ante-Entern Creek, as Blackford always wrote it. 3 circuses made their appearance in Shepherdstown and Boonesboro during the summer of 1838, one of which the Blackford boys attended, quote, to the great dissatisfaction of their mother, end quote. The Blackfords also enjoyed the visits of Irish, and German peddlers from whom they purchased linens and trinkets. They joined in public celebration of Washington's birthday and July 4th in Shepherdstown, where they enjoyed military parades, martial music, and the firing of small arms, as well as the refreshments at the springs as customary. So you notice that these people are going to 4th of July and all of this stuff, all while your ancestors were still enslaved. So for those who still want to celebrate the 4th of July, your foreparents will be looking at you like, okay, it's not celebrating, it's commemorating someone else's, quote, liberty or separation, not yours. It says, but Blackford looked askance at the Fandango barbecue, or whatever you call it, given in the park. The Blackfords enjoys visits to the Virginia Springs, I wonder if that's still there, to Haggerston and Harrisburg, and to Washington and Baltimore. All members of the family made short visits to Belinda Springs near Sharpsburg, where they took the bath and the mineral water and enjoyed the social entertainment. I'm sorry, I gotta look this up. That's the second time I saw that. And I just want to see if there is still such a thing. It's situated on the land, history of Belinda Springs, Sharpsburg, 2 miles southeast of Sharpsburg, Harper's Ferry Road. Here's all the words that we're reading about as we speak right now. Very, very, very interesting. Belinda Springs Farm. Let me look at the Let me look at some. This is where I suppose this is where, I don't know if it's still at Springs, but I'll definitely do some more digging because they mentioned it more than one time, and it looks like it's still there. Or maybe you're passing it and you don't know what it is. All right. I'll read up about that. That's just how my mind works. My apologies. Let's get back to it. It says here, where they took the baths in the mineral water and enjoyed the social entertainment. On these trips, they were often entertained by Colonel John Miller's family, who were devoted friends of long standing. Blackford and his sons visited Haggerston and Harrisburg, chiefly on business, but on one of his trips, he attended a party at Calhofer's, quote, where we drank pretty freely of champagne wine. And he arose the next morning, quote, with headache and bad feelings from having taken too much champagne, end quote. Blackford and his daughter Helena made an extended business and pleasure trip by boat to Washington. So they were just all over, huh? Thence by train to Baltimore and back home. They were accompanied by Colonel and Mrs. Miller and their daughter. In Washington, they visited the City Hall, the Capitol, the White House, where they talked with President Martin Van Buren. They attended musical performances at Miss English Female School and other salons. Blackford took his wife to the Shenandoah Springs in Shenandoah Valley, where they spent a week and took the medicinal waters and bath, enjoyed a quiet and peaceful rest. The season was over, so they saw few people and found little social entertainment. I ain't gonna put y'all through that. I'll look it up in a second. Various exciting incidents and accidents occurred at Ferry Hill. Among others was the drowning of a horse that fell from the tow path in the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. More tragic was the accidental drowning of a young man in the Potomac River. He was a member of a skating party. The thin ice broke and he sank beneath the surface and was drowned before his companions could rescue him. The incident that caused greatest excitement, however, was the robbery at Ferry Hill Place. While Blackford was away at the Shenandoah Springs, a slave boy belonging to Dr. Joseph Hayes of Sharpsburg broke into his office and took $170.77 from his cash box. Yellow Boy Charles, as Blackford called him, was tried and convicted of the crime in Washington County Superior Court on November 27, 1838. You know what I find interesting as I'm reading these narratives here? And as I'm talking, I want to look up Shenandoah. I find interesting that the acquisition of enslaved individuals from the homeland, oh, it's still there too, from the homeland, from the continent actually, and the way the unjust way of which people, there we go, Shenandoah Springs, very interesting. I'll take a look. The way in which people were acquired through means of being kidnapped, through means of being, lured away from home, through gunpoint and all kinds of things like this. So they knew that the acquisition of these people was not because they were indebted or in bonds. It was something that was illegal, unethical, and a very heinous crime. But once they got not even to the boat, by the time they got to the boat, the European went through great pains to make sure that they weren't robbed of their, quote, investment, to make sure that they got the fullness of what I find that very interesting. And so this man is, it says here that he was prosecuted Washington Court, Superior Court, for $170, but hundreds of thousands of dollars, and if not millions of dollars in today's time, was used and stolen by way of human capital. But that's not something to be, put on charges for, let's say. So I see a lot of these runaway conversations, and it's like, I got to get my property back. I cannot be robbed. I cannot be, and there's a Jamaican saying, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but in the Caribbean, there's a saying that a thief doesn't like to see a thief with long back, or a thief no likes a thief. So you know that you got, or you acquired these people by unlawful means, but you're going to do everything to make sure that someone doesn't do something unlawful to you. And that's unjust weights and balances right there. And just weights and balances is the Most High's delight. And I noticed that as we're reading this, it's like, I'm going to go to the full extent of the law. But you know that when you went there, you bought hot goods. You understand what I'm saying? You know that you were being partaking in something that was acquired in a way that is unlawful. But that part doesn't matter. But once it comes into my possession, I don't want anybody robbing me. I'm sorry, I just had a thought. I just want to share it because that every time I see, it was another man. Oh, his name escapes me. He threw, he threw, the name escapes me. It'll come back to me. But basically, the story was that on his way, he didn't, according to him, he didn't pack enough water on his journey over. And by the time he got over, he decided to throw a certain amount of slaves overboard alive, by the way, alive, to collect the insurance money. And then by the time he got into port in Jamaica, he tried to put in that claim with the insurance company. But long story short, it went to court, this, that, and that, because they're trying to figure out if they really owe him. Understand that the insurance companies in England, in wherever it is that they are, the origin of the ship is, they insured the heads of slaves, sometimes 30, 40 pounds a head. You understand? So even if you die along the way, they are being compensated for this money. And the name escapes me, but I have to find out. There's so many stories starting them out. So my point is, like I said, they made sure that they got paid, even though they know the goods that you have are stolen, and you didn't come by them in honest ways or honest means. So, anywho, Dissolution. John Blackford, author of the Ferry Hill Plantation Journal, published herewith, died from a lingering illness in less than a year after he made the last entry in the journal on January 15, 1839. In his will dated November 1st, 1839, he disposed of his large estate. He divided Ferry Hill among his 3 sons. To Franklin, he bequeathed lands purchased from Thomas Van Schweringen, including the ferry house, landing, and lot, together with boats and apparatus, the franchises and privileges, and the landing in Virginia and to the land thereto attached. In addition, Franklin was given Orchard Field, the lot along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, and the dwelling house and vacant lot in Shepherdstown. With the ferry went Edmund and Julius the foreman. Henry Blackford was given Ferry Hill Place. William Moore Blackford was given the Lower Farm, the Shepherd Place, the Bedford or Benninger Farm, and his father's gold watch. Jeanette Smith, Blackford's eldest daughter, received $12,000 in money. They say, I wasn't there. I wasn't the one who owned slaves. I didn't have anything to do with it. Well, you got the wealth. He's passing it on down. So the daughter received $12,000 in money and her mother's gold watch. Helena Blackford received $12,000 and the family's portraits. Catherine Node, Blackford's wife's sister, received the income of $3,333, which yielded an annuity of $200 for life. After the above bequests were taken care of, the executors were to sell the other property and divide the proceeds equally among the 5 children. The executors ordered a public sale of Blackford's personal estate to begin on December 10, 1839. The inventory of the property reveals a house well stocked with silver, a large quantity of Brussels, ingrain, and Garth carpets, some completely new, a large number of mahogany and cherry bedsteads, tables, sofa, lounges, and secretaries. The desk that you sit and do your work. 8 dozen Windsor chairs, a large collection of valuable books, end quote, lamps of all kinds, glassware, clocks, Williams and Franklin stoves, and a great variety of kitchen furniture. The plantation was stocked with work and breeding horses, milk, beef, breeding cattle, 50 fat hogs, and numerous brood sows and stock hogs, a large herd of Saxon and Merino sheep, wagons, carts, plows, cultivators, rollers, and windmills, large quantities of hay, wheat, rye, corn, oat, hemp, and flax, timber, planks, shingles, locust posts, saw logs, and firewood, a blacksmith shop and a sawmill, a carriage, a bruche, sleigh, gig, cart, and harness, and finally 16 slaves. The executor reported $30,917. By the way, in that time, that's a lot of money. And 22 cents derived from the sale. No report was made of debts collected, sales of stock shares, or the Kentucky lands Blackford is known to have purchased. A clearer understanding of the value of the estate may be gotten from the knowledge that in 1846, Henry Blackford sold Ferry Hill Place to his brother Franklin for $17,180. Assuming that the portion of the land estate which fell to Franklin and William were about equal in value to which went to their brother, John Blackford left a land estate of something like 52,000 exclusively of land in Kentucky. His personal estate amounted to about 54,000, exclusive of value of shares in various business enterprise and money, certainly over 2,500 at interest. The total would have amounted to about 110,000, a very handsome estate in 1840. That is the introduction alone of the Ferry Hill Plantation, which by comparison to many others, is a very wealthy space when this man was doing what he was doing. Hold on one second. I just told you guys about that thing. I kind of like to substantiate. Can you hear me? Hold on one second. Can I be heard? I didn't see you said I was quiet. Can you still hear me now? If you could hear me, let me let go of the screen. If you can hear me now, I think you should be able to hear me now. Keisha says all of a sudden you're all of a sudden silent. Let me know if you can still hear me, and that should be good. And while you're doing that, let me see if I could find for you who was thrown. See, hold on. That's the name of it. I know I needed to get that for you guys as I was talking about it. Here it is. Let me give you back my screen so you can see what I was referring to. I kind of like to substantiate. You know, sometimes you listen to people, you be like, where did they get that from? Okay, it was called the Zung Massacre. That's the name of it. A summary. So this is where I'm talking about knowing you got slaves illegally. You could say you bought it all you want, but today if you buy stolen jewelry, if you buy a stolen Mona Lisa, if you buy anything that you know was gotten by illegal means, it's not rightfully yours. And so the fact that you're doing so much to protect what you know you got by illegal means, I think is interesting. So anyway, I was telling you about insuring slaves. The Zong Massacre, a summary. On 29th of November, 1781, Captain Luke Collingwood of British ship Zong ordered 1/3 of his cargo to be thrown overboard. That cargo was human, 133 African slaves bound for Jamaica. His motive, to collect the insurance. The case was brought to court, not for murder, but against the insurers who refused to pay up. This is the this is the cruel story of the Zong Massacre. So maybe we'll read that at another time. But this is the story, and there was actually someone who did a painting. What you're seeing here, somebody did the painting of it later on. This is called the Zong Massacre. So if you remind me, we could definitely go over this collectively so that you can understand that they were insuring slaves. They were insuring ships, and they were insuring slaves. And so again, I just find that to be a very, there it is right here. I'll just read it real quickly. It says, Captain Collingwood's decision. By the mid-November, the inexperienced Collingwood found himself in the mid-Atlantic, unable to navigate out of the calm winds of the doldrums. The slaves suffering from malnutrition, dysentery, scurvy, and disease began to die. By 28th of November, 60 had died, along with 7 crew members. Many more were failing sick. Collingwood began to panic because remember, he's trying to get, all of them were trying to find out how they can recoup their investment and profit. You know, so sometimes they front the trip and they want to be able to get you to port so that they can, or your ancestors support so that they can get money. But don't get it twisted. These guys were insuring per head. It says he began to panic. The delivery of dead slaves would earn the ship owners nothing. If, however, the Africans were somehow lost at sea, then the ship owner's insurance will cover the loss at 30 pounds per head. And he decides to throw over 133. And definitely we'll take a look at that. But I just wanted to get that because I loud and clear I can still hear you. I still can't hear. Keisha, see if you can go out and go in again. Let me type if you can't hear. So this is the stuff. Thank you for letting me know that you can hear. This is the stuff that, like I said, when we just brush over it, when we talk about reparations or when we talk about what it is that we want. The other day I had an issue with one of my services, and the guy was like, "Oh, ma'am, after we get over all of that, what is it that you want?" And it was clear to me as I read, the reparation bill and all that's needed. Like, we could complain all day long. That doesn't translate in the mind of an abuser. You understand? That doesn't translate. Your emotions don't translate. Once we healed our emotional issues as it relates to what we experience, our foreparents experience, and what we're currently experiencing epigenetically, we have to clearly define, what do you want and who is responsible? Who do I speak to? You understand? So when we're reading somebody like Ferry Hill Plantation and he had this much wealth, who is his parents today? Who is his progeny today? Are they still around? Did they still go forward with the wealth that they accumulated? Like, we have to get real serious about the conversation and not just do blanket terms without figures. They have figures, they have archives, they have records, and it behooves us to go into that. So for us to know that, hey, they were insuring slaves, and that's the Zong massacre. We'll take a look at that. But let me see. I'll just go a little bit more here. January 1838, Ferry Hill Plantation. This is his actual words. So we'll see how far we get today. He says, 4th Thursday, weather remarkably soft and pleasant. It is as warm as a day in May. Dr. Parent called. Mrs. B appeared to be better. Parent and Franklin rode shooting birds. Doc Smith called, dined, and spent 2 hours. Like, he's very anal. Like, dude, I'm sorry, dude. Oh my goodness. Like, you don't do nothing. He gonna write down everything. He brought Mr. Samuel Powell's receipt, dated December 2nd, for $50 in full. I place it in Dr. hand this day. $100 to be paid to Jonah A. and S. Benson Co. on the account. On account, I rode out and marked off the land I wished cleared. Helena and Mary Miller rode out this afternoon, discovered a sheep dead in the pasture. Will pulled the wool off him, and Murph threshing clover seed off the straw Enoch, hauling manure from hog pen to barnyard. Remember, this is his shorthand. My bought newspaper did not come by the last night's mail. So says the Shepherdstown postmaster. And he's writing all, like they said in the intro, he's writing all like misspelled and everything. Ned complaining, him and Jupe in the boat. 1, I guess this is the editor's note here. Dr. Richard Parent of Shepherdstown, Virginia, was Blackford's family physician and a close personal friend of John Blackford, whose will he witnessed. Mrs. B was John Blackford's wife. She never fully recovered from her illness and died in October 7th, 1838. Franklin was John Blackford's eldest son, married and with 1 son. Franklin lived in one of the houses on Ferry Hill Plantation and assisted his father in the management of various business enterprises. Author Josiah Smith, on Bonsboro, Maryland, a graduate of University of Maryland, 1833, had studied medicine under the famous Dr. Charles McGill of Hargeston. Smith married Janetta Y. Blackford, eldest daughter of John Blackford. Hold up. John A. and Samuel Bentz was general merchants in Bonesboro, from whom Blackford purchased many of the supplies for his family and plantation. Helena, also called Helen, was Blackford's youngest and unmarried daughter. Mary Miller, daughter of Colonel John Miller of Sharpsburg, Maryland, was close friend of Helena Blackford and a frequent visitor at Ferry Hill, where she sometimes spent a month on a single visit. Will Murph and Murphy and Enoch were slaves on Ferry Hill Plantation. Blackford was regular and an avid reader of Baltimore Patriot. He also subscribed to newspapers published in Hagerstown, Maryland, Richmond, Virginia, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and New York City. Ned or Edmund and Jupe or Julius were slaves who regularly attended the ferry boat on the Potomac River. Blackford called them foremen of the ferry. Other slaves sometimes assisted at the ferry, as did hired hands, including free Negroes, Indians, native whites. They always crack me up with this, like who's the native white? And Irish and German immigrants. Blackford brought a one-half interest in the ferry on the Potomac River from Henry Thomas Van Schweringen of Shepherdstown, Virginia in 1816. Okay, here we go. 5th, Friday. Weather, morning cloudy and some little rain. Only a sprinkle. Miss Hoffermeyer and Mrs. Miller called Dr. Perrin called. So that means they came to his house. Like back in the day, I guess calling somebody means you actually go there. Enoch suffered the gray mare to run off and broke off the shafts of the craft. The wind has sprung up and the clouds dispersed. The wind is from the south. It continues warm. The Reverend Hoffermeyer and Miss Miller dined with us, then set off home. I corrected Enoch by giving him a few lashes. Exchanged $30 with Franklin for canal scrip. He has taken the colt to break. He rode my mare to Sharpsburg in the evening. Received a letter from CK informing of the birth of a son. That Jeanette Smith was delivered of fine son at 10 o'clock this morning. Helena sent a small bundle and a note by the stage before she knew her sister's situation. I received 2 Patriot papers having missed one of the last mail, Ned and Jupe in the boat. The hands finished the clover seed. 6th, Saturday. Weather continues soft and warm, like onto spring. Dr. Perrin called Mrs. B, appears some better, took a, dose of magenta and spirit of nitre. Mr. Hargrove and Lady and Mrs. Swearingen called, spent a short time. I wrote a letter addressed to C. Node on the subject of the birth which Jeanette has given to a son. Sent Daphne with the letter and a bottle and money to get yeast. J.K. called 2 receipts, one for 60 B 44 wheat left in Mama's bill. Okay, so now we have some translation here. Miss Hoffermeyer and of Hoffermeyer, a close friend of Mrs. Blackford, was the wife of Lutheran minister of Sharpsburg, Maryland. Mrs. Miller, a close friend of the Blackford family and frequent visitor of Ferry Hill, was the wife of Colonel John Miller of Sharpsburg. The Reverend Mr. Hoffner was a minister of Sharpsburg. Blackford himself, an Episcopalian, contributed Hoffermeyer's church, which he sometimes referred to as a German Reform and sometimes as a Lutheran church. Let me make sure you guys are seeing again. Okay, it's working now. All right, I'm glad to hear it's working now. Sorry about that. It says the scarcity of small coins in circulation caused by the disappearance of specie during the Panic of 1837 led the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal Company in June of 1837 to issue notes of $5 or less and later on up to $20 in value. By July 1838, a total of $436,513.50 had been issued. The script circulated widely in Maryland and Virginia and spread also into Pennsylvania and Ohio. So that's showing they had some money issue, the scarcity of small coins in circulation. So what is this? 1837, they were having some money issues that he's noting to as it relates to the currency. Nothing new under the sun, right? Charles Node, Mrs. Blackford's mother, resided in one of the houses on Ferry Hill Plantation and cultivated a tract of land called the Lower Farm on which he paid rent. This was Blackford's eldest daughter who married Dr. Otho J. Smith of Boonesboro. Christian Jeanette, the family called her Jeanette or Janet. Blackford also did most planters of pre-Civil War South, administered patent medicines and standard drugs to members of his household, both white and black. So they were making up stuff in the back and that's what they would give you. Oopsie. Where did I go here? It's good to know how things have changed, or maybe not. It says John 19, John T. Hargrove was a Presbyterian minister residing in Shepherdstown. Mrs. Hargrove was a friend of Mrs. Blackford. Mrs. Swearingen, their names, man, widow of Henry Thomas Van Swearingen, from whom Blackford purchased the Ferry, and her family were close friends of the Blackfords and frequent visitors of Ferry Hill. Daphne, more often called Daff, was a slave woman. Joseph Node was Mrs. Blackford's nephew, and as a share tenant, cultivated the Bedford farm of the Ferry Hill plantation. Blackford used the letter W to represent pounds. All right, I'm gonna read one more. I'm gonna read page 5, and then we'll reconvene. It's getting late on this side. We're gonna reconvene tomorrow. So it says here, 32. 32B Rye and Stubbs Mill, which settled up his last year's rent being 138. He said he used W for pounds, so I don't know what B is. Bales, I suppose. 44 pounds of wheat, 85 and a half bushels of rye, 385 bushels of corn. Elizabeth called, spent the afternoon. Mrs. Eaton left before dinner. She spent 24 days with us. Like he got notes on everybody. Hannah Van Swearingen and Quigley's little son called, spent a short time. Murph has hauled 6 logs to the mill. Will piddling about feeding the hogs and cutting a little wood. Enoch helping Murph, Ned, and Jupe in the boat. 7th, Sunday. Weather continues soft and pleasant. Dr. Parring called quite early with a promise to call again in the afternoon. Mrs. B does not appear much better. 1 lamb only up to this date. 4 sows have 24 pigs. Dr. P called again this evening. J.K.'s wife came up in the evening and spent a short time. The wind sprang up from the southwest this evening. Have spent a very quiet day. There has been no company to interrupt the quiet of the family. And you notice how he says interrupt? Like, yeah, ain't nobody bothering us today. Mary, Miller, Helena, and myself and little William composed the family. Ned and Jupe in the boat, a milding business, the weather moderate. The 8th day, Monday. Weather, wind, blew, like is he the weatherman? Like, dude is the weatherman. He the secretary, he everybody. Monday, weather, wind, blew nearly all the last night. Clouded over and commenced raining about daybreak this morning. Wind shifted to northwest and cleared at 12 o'clock. Doc Perrin called. Mrs. B appears to be better. Abraham Smith called, paid the balance of his account in Cannell script, $12. Elizabeth came up and spent an hour and returned home. Murph and Enoch have hauled the sawmill 2 poplar logs and brought over some paling scanting. Let me get a pillow. Scantling and plank. Will has been piddling about the hogs and cutting some wood. 2 more lambs is reported, which is 3 now. Come Franklin exhibited the colt in his breaking gears. Ned and Jupe in the boat, very small business. Remember, he's writing this for himself. This is his own little private journal. 9th of Tuesday, weather, a large white frost this morning. Colonel Miller's black boy called to inform us of the decease of Mrs. Johnson, George Node's daughter Elizabeth. She died at Harper's Ferry. It is to be buried. So I'm just going to read the explanation of this right here. Blackford patronized both Samuel Muma's and Henry Stubbs' wheat and grist mills and stored his grain in their warehouse awaiting grinding and sale. Franklin Blackford's wife, as well as Joseph Node's wife, was named Elizabeth and even had a small child. Since they lived on the plantation and were frequently at Ferry Hill, it is not always possible to distinguish between the 2 Elizabeths. Miss Eaton of the Shepherd's Town was frequent as well as long-stay guest at Ferry Hill. Hannah was the daughter of Miss Henry T. Van Swearingen. Quigley's little son was Mrs. Van Swearingen's grandson. William Moore was Blackford's youngest child. 29. John Miller, 1787-1885, of Sharpsburg, Maryland, captain of the War of 1812. Wealthy planter and businessman, was a close friend whom Blackford named in his will as executor of his estate. The Nodes of Harper's Ferry, Virginia, were close relatives of Blackford. So we're going to stop. We're going to be on page 6 and pick up from there. But, it's good to see, like I keep saying, the other side of this conversation, not for the sense of justifying. Hey, shalom, brother. Shalom, brother Uziel. How's it going? It's not for the sake of justifying what happened. It's for the sake of understanding the system of slavery and the enslaved. You know, it's not one that, again, and I keep saying it, and hopefully, we'll have a conversation where everybody will be on, and to really say how much this has helped, because it's definitely helping me when we broaden the scope and the spectrum. So when we have this conversation, yes, we can have it from an intellectual standpoint, but emotional. Once we get past emotional and we get down to business. Now we have names. This is why you see me keep going. Like, oh, is that still there? Oh, is this still there? I'm doing that because that I need to make the connection in my mind that these things that the labor of free people enslaved individuals built up are still there. And if they are still there and still here today, now we have something tangible that we can speak about as it relates to who owes what. You understand what I'm saying? I think oftentimes the conversation has been too broad. Like, you owe us. Like, who owes us? Who are the names of these families? Who are the companies? There are some companies that are here today that got their start in slavery. Who are they? What are their names? And how do they relate to this conversation? So right now we're reading about a dude who, in his space and time, he was rich. He had a lot of business ventures going on, and we're going to continue to read his own personal journey that I'm quite sure he didn't expect a, quote, enslaved individual to read. Because remember, they kept you in an ignorant state for purposes of manipulation and being able to control. So basically, we were reading what he didn't think we would be able to read, but we're also seeing that it wasn't just that you jump up and you just tell the slave to work. There was stuff on the other side that needed to be done. After the crops were taken out of the field, there were so many other steps before that they can be profitable. So that's just for us, a lesson for us on the other side, when we think that money alone is going to solve the issue. Money alone is definitely not going to solve the issue. There's so many other things as it relates to building an empire, let's just say. So with that, most I willing, I'll come back tomorrow. We'll go on from page 6 and onward. And if you missed, hey, it's Brother Sal. I got visitors today. We got Sal. We got Brother Uzael. Oh, Brother Sal. Okay, I'm going to link you. Definitely. I clicked over. We see we got visitors today. But what was I going to say? Yeah, so if you missed what I said earlier as it related to slaves being insured, check out the Zong Massacre. It's right here. We'll probably read it coming up shortly. But this was a famous massacre. 133 enslaved Africans bound for Jamaica thrown overboard for insurance money. So definitely you might want to check that out. So like I said before, it wasn't a matter of, you know what? It's a small article. It's more than this. It's a small article. Why not take a listen? The Zong Massacre, a summary. It's a brief summary. You could definitely look it up. On the 29th of November, 1781, Captain Luke Collingwood of British ship Zong ordered 1/3 of his cargo to be thrown overboard. The cargo was human, 133 Africans, slaves bound for Jamaica. His motive, to collect the insurance. The case was brought to court not for murder, but against the insurers who refused to pay up. This is the cruel story of the Zong Massacre. Again, there's more, but this is the overview. The slave ship Zong, Z-O-N-G, on the 6th of September, 1781, the Zong, a slave ship, left the island of San Tome off the west coast of Africa, bound for Jamaica. So, and definitely look up the map and see where San Tome is. It says the ship was cruelly overcrowded, carrying 422 Africans destined to become slaves, accompanied by 17 crew. The human cargo was manacled and packed so tightly to have no room to move. But for the captain, Luke Collingwood, the more Africans he could squeeze in, the greater the margin of profit for both the ship owners and himself. For Collingwood, previously a ship surgeon, this was his first and last assignment as captain. Planning to retire, he hoped for a generous bounty to help him in his retirement. The greater the number of fit slaves he delivered to Jamaica, the greater his share. Captain Collingwood's decision. Hold on one second. Oh, sorry. His decision. But by mid-November, the inexperienced Collingwood found himself in the mid-Atlantic, unable to navigate out of the calm winds of doldrums. The slaves suffered from malnutrition, dysentery, scurvy, and disease began to die. By the 28th of November, 60 had died, along with 7 crew members. Many were failing or falling sick. Collingwood began to panic. The delivery of dead slaves would earn the ship owners nothing. If, however, the Africans were somehow lost at sea, then the ship owner's insurance would cover the loss at £30 per head. So Collingwood himself, suffering from fever, had an idea. This is a picture, they're picturing it here. It says, having discussed it with his crew, he made an imaginable, cruel, but to his mind, logical decision. Rather than allow the 6 slaves to die on board and be rendered worthless, he would throw them overboard and hence claim on the insurance. First mate James Kelsall protested, but was overruled. At some point during the trip, Kelsall had been suspended from duty, but we do not know whether or not it was for this act of protestation. On arrival in Jamaica, the ship's log had conveniently disappeared. Thus, on the 29th of November, 54 sick slaves, mainly women and children, were dragged from below deck, unshackled. After all, why waste good manacles? That's the writer putting that in there. And because they paid a lot of money in metalwork for them, trying to be funny. And heaved from the ship into the ocean. The following day, more were murdered. In the end, Collingwood had thrown 133 slaves to their death. Many struggled, and the crew had to tie iron balls to their ankles. Another 10 slaves threw themselves overboard, and in what Collingwood described as an act of defiance. The ship finally arrived at its destination on the 22nd of December, 1781. A trip that normally took 60 days had taken Collingwood 108. There were still 208 slaves on board, sold for an average of £36 each. The Zong massacre was depicted by the artist J.M.W. Turner in his 1840 painting Slave Ship. So this is what you're seeing here to the right. Slavers throwing overboard the dead and dying, typhoon coming on. And then they say click to enlarge. And then if you enlarge it, you'll see people in the water. You see balls on their legs, and you see the slave ship going off in the distance. Let me go back here. It says, horrid brutality. On arriving back in Liverpool, the ship's owner, James Gregson, duly made his claim. $4,000 for the loss of jettisoned, quote, cargo, end quote. The case went to court, not for the murder of 133 helpless Africans, but over who was liable for the cost. Collingwood made the devious claim that his actions had been necessitated by his concerns over the lack of water. He claimed to have had insufficient water to maintain the lives of his crew and the healthiest slaves. First, mate Kelsall, who described the episode as a horrid brutality, end quote, spoke out against this falsehood, and sure enough, it transpired that on arrival in Jamaica, there were still some 430 gallons of water to spare on board the ship. Therefore, the insurers argued it was for Gregson to stump the bill, not them. The decision, however, went Gregson's way. It says the same as if wood had been thrown overboard. The insurers appealed, and the case came before the court for a second time. By now, in May 1783, Collingwood had died. He had died only 3 days after the ship had arrived in Jamaica. And the case had become, tell me if you remember this guy, we're going to read his narrative soon. And the case had become a scandal of epic proportions in Britain. Olado Equiano, a former slave who had been brought his freedom and settled in London, brought the case to the attention of the leading English abolitionist, Granville Sharp. Sharp wanted to bring forward a case of murder, but the judge, Lord Mansfield, brushed aside his attempt, asserting, "What is this claim that human people have been thrown overboard? This is a case of chattel or goods. Blacks are goods and property. It is madness to accuse these well-deserving, honorable men of murder. They acted out of," this is the judge, by the way, They acted out of necessity and in most appropriate manner for the cause. The late Captain Collingwood acted in interest of his ship to protect the safety of his crew. To question the judgment of an experienced, well-traveled captain held in the highest regard is one of folly. By the way, they just said this was his first time as a captain. He's a ship surgeon. But anywho, especially when talking of slaves, the case is the same as if wood had been thrown overboard, end quote. Sharp may have failed in his attempts to seek justice, but over the coming years, he used it to lobby Parliament and the church, and it certainly increased the call for abolition. The Abolition Society, founded in 1787, used the Zong Massacre as the prime example of the slave trade's depravity. Finally, in 1807, Great Britain abolished the slave trade, which there's a whole nother thing on that. I'm not even gonna go there because the night is getting long. But I found out somebody hit me to it. So big up to the YouTube subscribers who'll be dropping some documentaries on me. That's another one. But anyway, last paragraph. But as a cruel postscript to the Zong Massacre, the practice of throwing slaves overboard did not end with the abolition of the slave trade. British seamen who persisted with the now illegal trade were, if caught, liable to a fine of £100 for every slave found aboard ship. The Royal Navy set up a squadron whose task was to patrol the coast of West Africa, capturing ships carrying slaves. This is after they kept, because the slave trade abolition didn't stop, they kept doing it. Captains on the slave ships, realizing they were about to be caught, would throw slaves overboard to reduce the fines they had to pay. So that was for me saying, I mentioned the Zong Massacre, I couldn't remember the name, and so therefore I wanted to get it for everybody so that you can put that one in your repertoire if you didn't know that one already. So I brought that up initially to say that to basically say that you were acquired, our foreparents were acquired by legal means, by kidnapping, stealing, everything else, okay? And they knew that they were in possession of stolen goods. And they had the nerve to turn around and insure those stolen goods and try to claim that they were owed. Now, in today's space and time, if you find a car that is stolen and then turn around and try to insure that stolen car, let me know how that works out for you. And so this is as you go into their documents, their side of the conversation, and to find out how much you had to justify within yourself and why they were so hyper vigilant, why they were so fearful, because somewhere in there, the conscience has to tell you that what I'm doing is wrong. And so as we continue to read Mr. Blackford's journal, we're able to see, somebody asked me one time, where's the money trail? Well, right now we on the money trail. We took a minute off of the emotion trail and we hot on the money trail to find out where did all this money really, really go. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Brother Sal, I'll go ahead and send you a message. Thank everybody for joining us. Most I willing, tomorrow we'll be back to read a little bit more about this money trail. Find out what's going on with Mr. John Blackford. And I'm going to do a little more reading on these springs that they said they kept visiting and see who owns them today. So with that, I'll pray everybody have a blessed night and continue to be that change you want to see in the world. One.